Well, Hannah, thank you so much for agreeing to doing this interview with us. We're really grateful to have you. I know the group is going to love hearing from you, and we'll just get started.
Yeah, so grateful. Thank you.
So
Yeah,
for
my
those
pleasure.
of the group that may not be familiar with your work, I know that you have two books now. One is Painless, and one is, I wrote the other title down because I haven't seen that one, The Myth of Low Self-Esteem. And is that a novel or part novel? I mean, it's fictional.
Yeah, they're both fictional. The first one is it's not my autobiography by any stretch, but there's probably 80% of it I would say is actually true, things that actually happened to me.
Got it.
So I just kind of snuck those little stories in there.
That's wonderful. And in terms of your work, you've been working as a counselor, supporting people for many, many years. And it sounds like, just like many of us, you've been on that journey of seeing what works for you, what's made a difference in your life. And that brought you into the understanding of the principles along the way. And now that's really the focus that you have in terms of supporting people.
Yeah.
And where would you like to start in terms of that journey? Just as I said, for those that aren't familiar with your work, where do you think is the best place to jump in?
Well, I think that to me it's still fascinating that I'm working with a community with chronic pain, because that's not my background. And my background is in the entertainment business. I lived in Los Angeles for 16 years on Venice Beach, and I worked in Hollywood for like 20 years. First in London doing theater work, and then in California doing movies. So it really was, you can always see it when you look in hindsight, how you ended up here.
Yes.
But I would have had no idea that this is what, people would be asking me about now. And when I was in pain all those years, it was just something I had to cope with. I never imagined it would go away. So the fact that it went away when I discovered, and started learning about the principles was such an amazing kind of side blessing, as you were, that's why I got curious and started, researching and seeing if I could help recreate that in other people. So yeah.
That's beautiful. And what have you seen thus far? I know that you've been working, even though it's a surprise, you've been doing it for a while now, and you've been running some wonderful programs. So what have you been seeing in terms of how it worked for yourself and how it really supports others?
Well, people often ask me, what did you do to make your pain go away, or how long did it take? And I'm like, I have no idea, because that wasn't my focus. When I went to London to do the One Thought program, and it wasn't until afterwards when I realized, I was like, wow, my back is strong and the pain's all gone. And not only had I not done anything, I'd stopped doing a lot of the things that I had been doing before, like chiropractic and massage and seeing doctors and homeopaths and all that kind of stuff that I've been doing for years. And it's funny, I never thought of myself as a sick person. There were just things I had to deal with, like allergies, some like stomach problems, skin problems. And when I look back over the years, I can see now that they were all connected to stress. Only I never thought I was stressed, because I'd been a coach for a long time. I've been counseling people since the early 80s. Other people are stressed, other people are anxious, and they would come to me for help, And the best I'd gotten to was, I knew negative thinking was a problem because I, experienced some severe PTSD in my 20s. So I knew that I didn't want to go back into that dark place. So the best I'd come up with was, controlling and managing your thinking, and, negative thinking bad, positive thinking good, so I had all these strategies and techniques, trained with all kinds of different methods and stuff to, like a game of whack-a-mole, like knock that negative thought down and knock that one down, and that's not allowed, and don't get too sad, and and now looking back, I realized that all that self-help work was actually keeping my nervous system revved up. Like the hypervigilance I had out there in my environment after the muggings and the PTSD I had, when that kind of subsided and I got well from that, it's like the vigilance kind of turned inward, and I got very vigilant about my thinking, like thought hygiene almost, and all the techniques and methods I used to do that, I now see were keeping me in a state of like alert all the time, that I was completely on edge, not in a like a neurotic way, but in a supervising, judging, monitoring kind of way, very responsible, you know. And I not only was like monitoring my own thinking, but I was monitoring yours, and you know, like how you parked your car and how you spent your money, and all of that was keeping me in a state of kind of mild fight or flight. Because when you're seeing that everything is wrong, that's your body equates that as danger. And when you're in danger mode, you're in survival mode. It taxes the body. That we weren't designed to be in that kind of prolonged stressful thinking for such a long time. So no wonder my skin was erupting when I was a teenager, and then, you know, I had all these terrible allergies, and then the back pain that I was paralyzed several times, like completely, you know, taken off to the emergency room. And so I think what happened is, as I started, you know, coming to this understanding and seeing the beauty and the simplicity of it, that I didn't need all those techniques, my nervous system started to calm down. And then, you know, all the signals that I wasn't listening to weren't needed anymore. So everything started to quiet down. And then I remember looking around going like, where did it all go? You know, I didn't work on it. It was just a natural, you know, side effect of seeing the simplicity of how we're all living in this thought created world, and that I didn't have to be scared of it, like Sid Banks talked about. And so the pain just kind of went away, which is, I'm very grateful for.
Yeah. Did you want to say, I wasn't sure if you want to go next.
No, you go ahead.
So I'm curious, in terms of not knowing when the pain went away, that, you know, that kind of like, oh, it seems like you realize like, wow, I haven't had pain for a while now. And then you sort of put the dots together. In terms of the understanding, was there a defining moment with the understanding? Was it a gradual unfolding? What was your experience in terms of seeing something shift that, you know, in your understanding that made a real difference?
Well, I think my very first big insight, and it sounds so silly when I say it now, because like I'll say it and it's like so obvious, but I remember I was, I'm sure you've met Shifra Rosenblatt. She's Charles' daughter. And so she used to live here in Jerusalem, and she used to teach these amazing foundations classes. And so like, I'm old enough to be her mother, but because she grew up with the principles, you know, I was so in awe of how she was so able just to teach it so naturally, because it was just, you know, it was just came so naturally to her. And I remember sitting in a women's group that she was leading. And there was a lady there talking about her, like a difficulty in her relationship. And because I've been coaching longer than Shifra's been alive, you know, I kind of piped in with my 2 cents of like what to do with her problem. And I said something like, well, you know, I've learned to ignore that kind of thinking. And Shifra very sweetly said, well, see, that worked for Hannah, or you could just do nothing. And I thought, but that's what I just said. You know, ignore your thinking. You don't have to do anything about it, just ignore it. And why is she criticizing me in front of other people? And I, you know, and I went right up in my head. Blah, blah, blah. I couldn't tell you anything else she said or anything else in that class, because I'm like up in my head now, like. And then fast forward about 6 weeks, and I was actually staying with Shah and Hannah in London, her parents. And it was a Sunday morning. It was the first day of the One Thought course. And you know, because it's a kosher home, you know, and I don't know if you've ever been in a kosher kitchen, but, you know, all the plates and everything is separate. So on a Sunday morning in London, a Jewish family is asleep, right? They're not getting up early, but I had to get up really early to get across London to start this course. So I'm creeping around their kitchen, trying to find the right spoon to go with the right bowl and find the milk and the cereal. Don't wake anybody up and be the good guest, you know. And I remember I sat in the kitchen. My point is, I wasn't sitting there going, you know, and I'm trying to be all spiritual. I'm sitting there concentrating really hard, right? Not to make a noise. And I suddenly thought, oh, ignoring your thoughts is doing something. And it was like, bam, it was like, like I say, it seems so obvious now, but it was like, I kind of saw through this, like thought up until that point was a thing I had to deal with. And I was always on the search for the right way to deal with it, which is another thing chronic pain are doing. We're perfectionists. We always have to even do our pain the right way, you know, and I have to do everything the right way. And so I saw that I'd been on this mission to do my thinking the right way. And when I saw that ignoring your thinking is still doing something, I got that shift from kind of the outside in thing, like, because, you know, prior to the principles, I knew about, you know, it was an inside job, and, you know, but I would thought like controlling my thinking was going from the inside, and I suddenly saw that's outside too. Trying to control my thinking is also outside in, because I'm still messing with the system. And when I saw that ignoring my thoughts was doing something, I suddenly saw how thought is going to move through my mind, whether I try and ignore it or not, whether I try and, you know, manage it, control it, reframe it, let it go, you know, all those things, that its nature is to move. So any attempt to fix or change that is actually either pointless or messing with the system and going to cause me, like I was saying, all that, you know, that added stress. So it was such a kind of, I don't know, that was a big moment for me. And another one that I had, I think, which was kind of equally powerful, was seeing the difference between thought and thinking. Like up until that point, I kind of thought the two were interchangeable, or there's same words, you know, two words for the same thing. But then I started seeing that, like, thought with a capital T, meaning like the principle, is a creative power. It's a creative energy. And I have no idea what I'm saying right now. It's just some kind of creative, spooky energy that goes through my mind, our minds. And thinking is just one of the things I do with it. And so I started, when I'm explaining it to people now, I say, like, well, it could be words, you know, like you see on a, like, subtitles maybe, or a ticker tape, but it can also be images, or even music, or it's such a, like, an amazing creative power. It just shows up in different ways. And that kind of opened up another level, another world of seeing how glorious it is, and how by innocently misunderstanding it, I can really mess things up, you know? Yeah.
It's really powerful.
Yeah, I find myself listening to you, and I'm trying not to sort of have an agenda around this, but I'm thinking of some of the experiences that I've had, and I do feel like this is a growing edge for me in terms of how I show up as a coach. But I have had experiences where I've worked with athletes with chronic pain, so much so that, you know, that their career has come to an end, or their career has been put on hold. But in certain instances where their career has come to an end, and, you know, like, for argument's sake, someone might have a concussion, and then they're having to deal with the after effects of that, the chronic pain that comes with that concussion, and also the fact that their career has basically come to an end. I have had this experience where in their mind, they can't really enjoy their life with this chronic pain. They're basically waiting for the chronic pain to go away, and then they'll start doing life. Life will begin again when said chronic pain has gone away. And so I have struggled to sort of have this conversation with them around thought, because they're so attached to this narrative that life is on hold until you know, till this is now no longer my experience. So I would love to know, in those situations, kind of conversations that you would have, basically, because I feel like you can really help me be a better coach in the future when I encounter that problem. I do work with athletes from time to time, and that can be a theme that can be really difficult to get through.
I just have to be transparent about my perfectionism. I want to move my jacket that's on the chair behind you.
Yeah.
It's annoying me.
I get it.
The whole aesthetic has been destroyed.
I didn't like it.
I get it. Yeah, I totally get that.
I want to move the painting so it doesn't look like my head is blowing up.
That's right. Angus's mind is blown.
Yeah, that's funny. Like, oh gosh. Yeah. So, well, two things kind of come to mind. One is a quick story. I had in between working in Hollywood and then like doing coaching as a full-time job, I had a 5-year job working in a school in Los Angeles, an elementary school, and it was we had a lot of inclusion kids, you know, like kids of different abilities and different, like, physical abilities. And in my first 8th grade girls class, there was an amazing young lady who was in a wheelchair, and she'd been in a wheelchair her whole life. She has 24-hour nursing care. She has a tracheotomy, like she's connected to a breathing machine. I don't really know what her, you know, the condition or label you would call it, but she could barely move her body, basically just her fingers, and she could speak, and her mind was quite active. But it was hard to understand her because of the breathing thing, and she needed, they say, 24-hour care. And a friend of mine at the time was a physiotherapist for the school district. And I mentioned this young lady, and I've got her permission to tell her story. And I mentioned to my friend about Miriam, and she burst into tears, and she said, I was her physio when she was in 1st and 2nd grade, and we were told she probably wouldn't make it. And here she was in 8th grade, right? I said, yeah, she's doing amazing. She has, you know, she keeps up with her studies with everybody else. And so after she graduated from the elementary school, I kind of lost touch with her. Anyway, she found me on Facebook, and when I wrote my first book, she got hold of a copy, and she sent me this message. And she said, people always think my problem is physical. She said, it's not, it's my thinking just like everybody else. And I was like, wow, Miriam, you're a philosopher. And she's now like 26, 27, and she raises money. She goes to Disneyland. She has an amazing life, you know, and she's no saint. She can have her bad days and get, you know, grumpy with her caretakers. But when she said that, it kind of confirmed for me, because when I'm working with people with pain, which I'm sure you find too, Angus, is that, well, everybody has their sticking point, you know, their blind spot, their yeah, but, right?
Yeah.
And for some people, the yeah, but is, you know, financial, or it's relationships, or it's, you know, my mom's in the hospital, or what, you know, different people say, you can't say that's thinking. So people say to me, but I'm in pain. You can't say that's thinking, you know? And that was actually kind of helped me to kind of understand thought more for myself, is that pain in itself is really a signal, and it's an unreliable signal. It's an unreliable indicator, because if you think about it, you could have a soldier who's got a bullet in his leg and he might not even feel it. And then remember the last time you had a paper cut, you know, and it kills. Right? So the degree of pain is unreliable in terms of tissue damage. One thing. I always direct people to the amazing phenomena of phantom limb pain. You know, people who are missing a limb for different reasons, but they often talk about having an itch or a burn or a pain in a limb that doesn't exist. So where is that pain happening, right? And then you start seeing that all pain is actually happening in the brain, whether it's a burn or a fracture, a surgery, an injury, or it's a stress-related thing that's coming from an emotional, you know, source. That all of it is actually happening in the brain, and the brain is only as good for us as the thoughts it then produces. Because how would you know you're in pain unless it's produced a thought? So kind of these are all the kind of things I start putting together for people. And so for some people, the pain isn't going to go away. Like, you know, some people do have, you know, illnesses and things that are not going to get better. And so learning how to, I want to say cope, that's not the right word, but learning how to, that your state of mind, your level of consciousness is going to affect how you experience that, whether it's just a paper cut or, God forbid, you know, a tumor or something that's life-threatening. And like Dr. Bill Pettit is, you know, one of my mentors, and I've been learning with him for a long time. And I remember him teaching us that in a lower state of mind, someone will experience pain much greater than they will if they're in a better state of mind, you know. So a lot of the things that I'm seeing now is just really about lifting people up into a better mood. You know, sometimes just because I find people in pain, like, I mean, a lot of people are in a low place, want to repeat the story and keep talking about the symptoms and keep telling me, you know, like what the doctor said and what the MRI said, and, you know, like keep focusing on the problem, which is just going to bring you down. And it's not that we don't care and we don't want to hear about it. It's more that, okay, we're done with that. You know, you want to lift them up into, you know, seeing it differently. So I always use the analogy of an elevator, that from higher up, a higher floor, you get a better perspective. And I find either the pain starts to go away because they are in a better place if it's a stress related thing, or if it's a structural thing, or, you know, an organic cause of the pain, then being in a better mood, a better perspective, starts to open up other possibilities that they couldn't have maybe seen before. that some people live with, like this girl Miriam, she's going to be in a wheelchair for the whole of her life, and she's not letting it stop her, so it really is perspective, which comes down to how you see, like I'm either living in that thinking, or I'm living my life, which one am I doing at any given moment?
I guess the key is that that they then don't move forward thinking, oh, I've got to manage my negative thinking. I've got to, substitute my negative thinking with the positive thinking.
Right.
Because I'm sure that would be typical in that situation.
Yeah.
They're like, they're looking for that magic bullet. How do I get out of my negative thinking to a better mood?
Right.
So I'm curious about that conversation too.
Yeah, because you just reminded me, I had a client he was in New York, and I forget what particular pain he has, maybe back pain or stomach pains. And in the first probably 10 minutes, he probably repeated, I need to be 100% pain-free. Probably repeated 2 or 3 times. And he kept saying, but can you tell me I'm going to be 100% pain-free if I do this? Because a lot of money. And I said to him, first of all, I'm not a doctor. And secondly, I don't know a doctor who could promise you that you're going to be 100% pain-free. And secondly, do you feel that pressure? Because I do, right? I'm feeling that pressure right now of you needing to be 100% pain-free. I said, why don't we take that idea and put it on the shelf, and then you and I just have a conversation. And then we carried on for a session, and at the end of it, I was just kind of like, recapping with him. I said, how are you doing now? He said, well, when you said we could put that idea on the shelf, he said, I never thought you could do that. Like, you could do that with a thought. Like, you don't have to think it. He said, I'm still stuck on that, which was like an hour and a half, an hour earlier. And he said, and I just felt the pressure come off. I said, you mean I didn't need to waste my last hour talking to you? And he said, no, that was all good. I was actually able to hear it because we put that, that pressure thought on the shelf.
Yeah.
I said, there's no shelf, right? And he was like, oh my gosh, there's no shelf. Right? There's no shelf, and that thought moved on. We didn't have to actually do anything with it. That's the reliable system. That's the nature of thought.
Yeah.
And so it kind of, I think that was a really good lesson for me to help someone, take, just steer them away from those thoughts that are a burden. And the burden is actually going to then dysregulate the nervous system and add to the discomfort and the dysregulation in the body.
Yeah.
So, because I think sometimes there's pain, and then there's our thinking about the pain.
Yeah.
And I might not be able to do anything about the actual pain if it's a structural or organic thing, an injury, let's say. But the thinking about the pain is what I think most people are actually experiencing. And so when you can help them, point them in the direction of their own wellness, and see that's a lot of that is created by the misunderstanding, then the extra thought starts to decrease, which then takes pressure off the nervous system, which then adds to the healing and the better feeling.
Yeah, you're freeing up a lot more bandwidth to focus on the actual physical healing. Yeah. I guess the metaphor that came to mind as you were talking about the shelf is kind of like, in my mind, I'm constantly painting pictures, and I can paint a very elaborate picture of pain, but hey, I can just put the brushes down.
Yes.
Yeah. and all that energy can be redirected to the process of feeling the physical body.
Yeah.
It's a really interesting way to think about this sort of theater that we carry around in our head, which is where pain exists. So it's a really beautiful perspective.
I'm curious in terms of your client saying is where would they get caught up on that?
The but is like, I'm an athlete. I'm designed to perform at a very high level, and that's been taken away from me now. And it sucks to be in chronic pain. And this is my but when this goes away, I can get back to life. In the meantime, it's like, I'm just stuck here. And I guess it's been difficult to have that conversation because they're so attached to their but.
And the but is that I can't do my sport. I can't play my sport.
Yeah. Can't play my sport. And I think that's mostly at the back of it, is they feel really, they're struggling with the fact that, that their peer group is now excelling, and we're talking at a pretty high level.
Yeah.
They're getting all the accolades that you would get at a certain age in that sport, let's say. And so that's the backdrop of it all. And all along, they're still experiencing this pain, which is a constant reminder.
Kind of like,
yeah, you're not out on that field of play. You're not out on that field of play.
Right, because it's kind of what it sounds like is their identity is wrapped up in the being the, you know, the professional athlete, being the best in their, you know, their particular sport. And when you can't do that, especially if it's a sudden thing like an injury, that could be very devastating to an identity that is built all around that story.
Yeah.
So yeah, I could imagine that. I mean, I know I had that. In fact, I had it in the reverse, like when because you know I was mugged 3 times, and after the third one, and I got very, very dark very quickly. I was, you know, very frightened to leave the house. And when I eventually asked for help, and one of the first amazing people that, you know, really kind of got through to me, she said to me, "Am I willing to let go of my story?" And my story was, I was the girl who was mugged 3 times. You know, I could get that into any conversation. And for either for sympathy or attention or all kinds of things, it could get me out of stuff too. And so what she said and what I heard were 2 very different things. Because she said, was I willing to let go of my story? I heard, it didn't happen, or it didn't hurt, or get over it. Right? And in my head, I was screaming, it did happen, it did hurt, and I can't get over it, you know? And so at first it was very threatening, because my whole identity was around this, you know, the trauma and the darkness, and, you know, depending on who I'm talking to, I was a survivor or I was a victim, you know? And so if I let go of that, then who am I? I didn't know who I was anymore. And what does that girl wear? And like, what does she do? And how do I speak? And if I don't have these terrible stories to talk about, would you be interested in me? You know, like maybe I'm boring. Maybe I've got nothing to say. You know. So it was like letting go of all the trauma and the drama was a big deal for me. And it felt like I was like this, just floating around, and I didn't know who I was. And it was like but then like it was a journey of finding out who I really am, and who I really was underneath all that, you know. So I could imagine for your clients, it'd be like their identity, if their world is built on that story, it's gonna be like rocked. And so seeing that it could be a positive thing to discover who you really are underneath that. You know, you could be an advocate for, you know, for athletes, or there's lots of other things that you have worth and value besides, you know, your physical prowess, you know.
Yeah, that is ultimately a direction I find the conversation goes in. I guess it's at the back of my mind, there's a little bit of insecurity, because I think that part of what they're thinking is like, hey, put yourself in my shoes, you'd be thinking exactly the same thing. And I think I probably would be.
Right. Yeah.
It's all like, who am I to share this understanding with someone who's you know, and obviously, you know, everybody has these extreme stories. But I haven't lived that extreme story. So it's like, it makes me feel a little bit insecure sometimes with such high stakes, saying, yeah, it's all just your thinking. or not that I'm saying it in such a trite way, but you know what I mean.
So you identify with the pain of their story
on some level. Yeah,
that can happen. Absolutely. So can I ask a question now?
Of course. Sorry.
So no, I love that conversation. And something else I've heard you speak about, Hannah, is in terms of PTSD and the ideas about pain, not just pain, but trauma being stored in the body. I'd love for you to share what you see around that and how you speak to that, because one of the things that sort of the direction that the rewilding metaphor looks in is that it is about embracing it all. It's not about transcending the human experience. It's about being fully embodied and understanding that we're safe in whatever experience comes through us. But in some of the other embodied teachings, we'll talk about how trauma is stored in the body, and then there has to be specific processes done to release it or heal that. And so I'd love to hear you speak to that from the basis of this understanding.
Yeah, it's funny, even before the principles, that idea that trauma is held in the body never made sense to me. when people would say that, I'd say, well, like, where is it in my elbow? Like, is it in my spleen? Is my resentment of my mother in my shoulder? You know, like, where exactly is it? Tell me where it is, and I'll do something about it. You know, it seemed like so woo-woo to me, you know, even though it was coming from people who are, you know, scientists. And so when I mean, it's funny, now that I can see that there isn't anything that isn't thought, right? Like, I'm no good at math with numbers, but I know if something is 100% thought created, there isn't a percentage that isn't. You know, it's like if you've eaten all the pizza, there is no more pizza. So, right? So it's like if we live in a thought created world 100% of the time, that thinking that trauma is held in the body would be like somewhere outside of that. It would be like another entity somehow. And so that kind of, as I started researching this and reading more and more and more, you know, there a lot of the stuff, what I found is there's some incredible scientists out there with doing amazing work in like pain research and some really incredible stuff they're doing. But what I started noticing is that no matter how advanced the science got, they would still go back to an outside in solution. And to me, this trauma is held in the body it falls into that outside in solution area, because if I can like, once it becomes a thing, you know, you could like you could think you can point to it, then there's something to do. You know, because if trauma is held in the body, then we better do something about it. You know, I'm a smart, responsible person. I don't want to live with like this anymore. I want to be free of my trauma. I don't want to be held back. So let's do something about it. And so then you get a whole, you know, stream of techniques and methods, meditation, journaling, expressive writing. You know, they talk about there's a whole release the, you know, the energy within that's captured and all that stuff. And I can see how that in one way could make sense to people, because when you're in that kind of dark PTSD place, it feels very heavy. Like there was such a heaviness to my body, to my thinking. And I now know, I just see that as low mood consciousness. You know, that's just being in a low mood. And I was in a low mood for a good 10 years, you know? So no wonder my body was started screaming and, you know, yelling through the back pain and the skin problems. So once I saw through like and started understanding the illusion of the thought, the idea that something can be held in my body, it just seemed even more unfeasible, right? So it all comes down to a lot of Freudian ideas. And I read a book this summer called Why Freud Was Wrong, and it was about this thick. It was so entertaining. You know, he was brilliant at marketing. Freud, because we're still talking about him and we're still using his ideas. But by his own admission, he was not a good doctor. And he was just...
He was a great influencer, right?
Completely. He was. He started a business called psychotherapy, and he sold stocks and shares in it and had franchises. And if you didn't follow his specific rules for how to set up a psychoanalysis franchise, you're out. You know, he was very, very strict about it, and he marketed it and he sold it really well. But the idea he sold was that that the subconscious is containing all this stuff, and if we don't find it, don't analyze it, it's going to get you. And the more I read about that, I was like, I cannot subscribe to an idea that's really based on fearful thinking. You know, the thought that trauma is held in the body is a fearful thought. The idea that there's something lurking in my subconscious I need to find, or else, you know, it's going to trip me up or make me repeat, you know, bad behaviors or something, is a fearful thought. And so, and the other thing I've really been looking at recently is Freud wrote that at our core, we are untamed beasts and have conflict. And if you think about anybody who's had a near-death experience, what do they usually describe? They talk about the light at the end of the tunnel. They talk about glory and abundance, like Anita Moorjani, and you know, probably like you know, her book is just amazing in terms of like describing the abundance and the magnificence of her, what she felt when she was free from her body. And Sid Banks talked about the body being a metaphor. So I find it very hard to believe a theory that wants to believe that we're dark and savage and conflicted, because it just doesn't make sense to me when you see that at our core we're wellness and happiness and love and connection. The two just don't go together. So I think it's I think a lot of that thinking and those concepts are coming from a low state of mind, which, you know, like we'd say, is an innocent misunderstanding. Once you see through that, it's just a story that someone made up. And I think people like to believe it because when you're also in a low place, it kind of makes sense. Like, it's not my fault, it's held in my body. That's why I'm in a bad mood. Yeah.
Can I say something?
Yeah.
And I guess when people get into a low mood, and they go, so let me just rewind a little bit, because this is a fantastic conversation. But you do get a strong sense that a big part of psychotherapy is like, let's go work on the trauma. And the way that they're talking about working on the trauma, it's just like it's stuck in the body somewhere, although they'll probably say, yeah, it's stuck in the mind, it's stuck in the memory. Right. So in a sense, it's like it has to all be about what you're saying is it's all about state of mind. And they're saying is like, no, you're kind of like, it's almost like, you know, in the old days, they would have probably brought in an exorcist. It's almost like psychotherapy is modern exorcism in a way. But that's how it's like, that's for me, it's really interesting to sort of like get some clarification and get some language about how to address these issues with clients who've been given a label, told that they're broken, told that they really need to work on their trauma. When all that's doing is just stirring up a hornet's nest and getting them more identified with the trauma, that it is sort of somehow stuck inside.
Or the thinking.
The thinking,
Yeah.
Angus is in a little bit of, I don't know if it's a difficult situation, but he works at a treatment center where they will use, you know, some of those approaches. And so then he works with clients and is like, what, you were told what?
I don't know if anybody will see this, but from the treatment center, but in a sense, it's almost like, sometimes I feel like I'm kind of doing damage control. So they'll like, you know, get attached to their trauma. They need to work on their trauma. They need to looking at their trauma. They get into a really low mood. And then I kind of got to somehow bring their mood back up and help them see how that's, in a sense, there's folly. I have to be diplomatic about the language that I use. So it's just a case of, you know, I'm constantly looking for ways to upgrade that language. And that's why I love everything that you're saying is so wonderful, because it's this is something that needs to be addressed.
Yeah. A couple of years ago, Mara and Eric were here. They did a conference at the university here. And so they had me speak on a panel called Reimagining Fear. And she wanted me to, you know, tell my story. So I went into quite a lot of graphic detail about the muggings and the terror and the injuries and, you know, and the PTSD afterwards, because there were quite a few people in the crowd from the university who were, you know, psychology and psychiatry professors and students. And afterwards, they came and spoke to me, and they could not believe that I'd gone through that and was this well. You know, because I talked about, you know, I'm not damaged. I have a great life, and I love my life, and I go anywhere I want at that time. And so they kind of were implying that either I was lying about how bad it was, because you can't get well from something that bad, or I'm not doing as well now as I claim to be, right? And I'm like, hold on, you just saw me sitting on a stage in front of several hundred people, you know, like, and they're like, well, then, and then I said, first of all, it was 30 years ago, but that doesn't mean anything, because we all know people who have been suffering from something 50 years ago and are still suffering because they're stuck in the story still. On the other hand, like, it's 30 years ago. It's not, I'm right here, right now. I'm fine, right? I don't believe I'm damaged. I don't believe I'm broken. I don't need fixing. And so they were completely confused by that. So yeah, I get it. I come across a lot of people who are so immersed in the labels. In fact, some of the younger people I work with want labels, which is blows my mind.
Yeah,
you know,
I've seen that a lot.
I had a 14-year-old girl here recently, and she was diagnosed with something called misophonia. Have you heard of that one?
I don't know what that is.
Right. So it's in the DSM. It's a fear of certain noises.
Oh my goodness.
and the noises are always like clicking, like mouth noises or breathing. And so she was the second person I'd heard with this diagnosis. So when she was coming, I kind of thought, I'll look it up and just learn a little bit. And I watched a YouTube lecture from Duke University, which I believe is quite a well-respected university. And the professor was talking about it, and he said that it was a neurological condition, and it's usually found in single young white females. And I thought, hold on a minute, how can it be neurological if it's only found in, girls from California? Like, no, right? Right. So, I mean, this girl was from Germany originally. Her father was actually the ambassador here. So anyway, at the time, and then I found out she insisted she wanted to go to a psychiatrist, but her parents wanted to try, something with me first. And I realized then I said, hold on, then you haven't got a diagnosis. She had Googled it, found something that fit what she was feeling, and gave the label to herself. So I asked her what does it feel like when you hear these noises, like from people eating or breathing? I said, what happens in you? She says, I feel violent. I said, have you ever hit anyone? And she said, yeah. I said, who did you hit? She said, my brother. I thought, who hasn't hit their brother? It's like, or they hit you, And then I said, well, what if you were on an airplane where you're like very closed in, and the person next to you you don't know them, and they're eating their lunch. I said, would that annoy you? She said, yeah, it'd be like, I could see her going, oh, it'd be awful. I said, would you hit them? And she said, no. I said, well, I was like, that's interesting, don't you think? But she insisted, and eventually her parents had to take her to the psychiatrist because she wanted a label to explain what she was feeling. Meaning she needed a reason to explain why she didn't want to do her homework. Really, that's really what it was. She didn't want to go to school. She didn't want to participate. She didn't want to be with the family when they're eating meals. And I could just see that, and she got that it was her thinking. She knew that she was up in her head, and it was all made of thought, and it was producing, she wasn't eating properly. She was, having stomach problems, other kinds of problems because of she really had problems. That wasn't the issue. The issue was that she wanted a label, and then she could be almost disabled by it. And I was like, that was so sad. It kind of broke my heart. And sadly, she, that's all she could focus on. So her parents, they took her, and I checked in with them, and they said she's got a label now, but it hasn't changed anything.
Yeah. It's interesting. It's almost like they have their narrative, and all of a sudden they have a title for the narrative. The label is the title for the narrative that they've been living. And there's a sort of, I guess there's a little bit of a relief in that, but ultimately it doesn't solve anything. It's like, oh, gee, thanks, I have a label now. Nothing's really changed. I just have a definition.
But in a sense, just seeing how the wisdom is unfolding to her, to the best of her abilities, she was finding a way to take care of herself, because if she had that label, then she could, not have the pressure. Like, that was her way of taking the pressure off. Just like somebody who maybe uses alcohol or drugs to take the pressure off. There's all these different ways that our wisdom guides us to take the pressure off based on our level of understanding in the moment.
I guess they feel like, if I know what it is, then at least I can maybe treat. Hopefully there's some way to treat it.
Yeah, or even to sort of the deeper wisdom, it sounds like, was to take the pressure off of school and all of these other things. And that was a way to do that with the level of understanding that was available.
Yeah.
And I think that's also so helpful to be able to see, well, what is the health in everything, no matter what it looks like. There's wisdom unfolding in that. I mean, I'm thinking about with our kids, sometimes people are like, is that really health? But really it is actually their wisdom underneath it all.
But you just made me think of a time for a quick story.
Go ahead.
With a happy ending. I had a client here that I'd met quite a few years before I'd come across the principles. And she was in a really bad way. It was her third suicide attempt. She was now in a mental hospital just outside Jerusalem. And a friend of mine who'd been trying to help her asked me if I would call her. And so I got in touch with her, which I don't know if you ever tried calling someone in a mental hospital. It's quite tricky because the nurses don't have time to put through personal calls. And if you get through to the day room, someone can pick up the phone and say yes and just walk off, you know. So I would take like five, you know, attempts at a phone call every day to actually get through to her. And at the time she had 10 diagnoses, you know, from borderline personality disorder, that she was cutting, she was, you know, drinking drugs. This was her third suicide attempt. And we eventually managed to get her out on condition that she have somewhere to live and she had a job. So some mutual friends of ours let her sleep on their daughter's bedroom floor. And she got a job working minimum wage in a hotel here, cleaning toilets. And she was, you know, nice girl from Canada. And here she was, you know, like sleeping on the floor and cleaning toilets. But something had shifted in her. And I kind of came across the principles as she and I were working together. And I started introducing her to these ideas. And she, you know, I said to her one day, what do you really want to do? Because like cleaning toilets that's the novelty that's going to wear off pretty quick. So she got herself a job in a hospice for babies. Like when children are born who aren't going to make it, then you know, it's often too much for the parents to cope with, especially if they've got other kids at home. So this hospice right in the center of the city here takes care of them either on a daycare or overnight as well. And she got a minimum wage job there, cleaning, feeding tubes and changing diapers. And she fell in love with these kids and she was really good at it. Oh. And her supervisor kept saying, you know, you've got something here. So I asked her, I said, okay, she was about 22 at the time. I said, like, so, okay, now what do you want to do? And she's like, I want to work in this professionally. So she had drunk her way out of high school at like 14, 15. She had no qualification. She didn't have her GED or anything. So she went back and got her like equivalent of her GED, her high school diploma in Hebrew. It's her second language. She decided she wanted to do her bachelor's in physical education. So to be a phys ed teacher. And so she got accepted at the university here, but they would only accept her if she had a clean bill of mental health. And she didn't. So she was now off all her medication. She was doing amazing. She had great, you know, reports from her supervisor. And she wasn't cutting, she wasn't drinking. She was like, apart from chain smoking, that was about the only thing she was still doing. And so I said to her, well, let's go back to the hospital and get the psychiatrist to write you a new report. And she was like, I can't do that. That's a waste of time. They're not going to do that. I said, we can try, you know, well, you come this far. So I'll never forget her calling me from the bus, you know, like, she said, what am I doing? This is a waste of time. I can't believe this. I said, just show up, ask him to see what he'll say. So she had an appointment and she went in to meet the psychiatrist and he got out her file. And he went through these 10 diagnoses and he was like, with a pen, he's like, that's gone. You don't have that anymore. And he got rid of all of them. He's like, who are you? It's like, are you the right person on this chart? And she walked out of there with a clean bill of health and she got into university. She is just finishing her third year now. She's coming top of the year in Hebrew, you know, like, so it's not her first language. Over kids who are, you know, much younger than her, like they're 18, 19-year-old, and she's like, what, 24, 25 now. And she's already been taken by their professor's recommendation, taken into the master's program while she's still finishing her bachelor's degree. Wow. And she now wants to go on. I mean, I can see her being and her dream is to work at the Special Olympics, right? That's her dream, is to work at the Special Olympics, either as a physical educator or, you know, maybe I'm sure she'll get a PhD eventually, you know, it's like, and like to think, like when I first spoke to her, she was, you know, in the mental hospital, lockdown, couldn't get out, and like, you know, I thought her life was over. And she gets the principles. It's like just part of life for her now. She's one of these people who doesn't need to teach it. She just sees it as truth, and it's just helping her go on and live an incredible life. And so I always say to her, like, I get to be like, I have a front row seat in her miracle, you know. It's like, it's just being able to watch someone unfold and just like, you know, her go off and, you know, just have this incredible life. And I barely get to speak to her these days because she's studying so hard. I check in with her every now and again. How are you doing? She's like, I'm okay. I've got an exam tomorrow. I'll call you back. Like, great, keep going. You know,
that is so hopeful. It's just so inspiring to hear the possibility of that.
Yeah, what an incredible story. That's lovely.
Yeah. Points us to what is available for all of us. And I remember Bill Pettit saying that these stories can look like they're the exception to the rule, but really they point us to what's possible, like what is available to us all. Yeah, it's beautiful. Well, this has been such a rich conversation. I feel like we could talk to you all day. So hopefully there'll be more opportunities.
Well, she did say she had no time frame.
Oh, so I guess you're going to really take advantage of that. No, but hopefully we can continue the conversation in other ways. And I know that you were, when was it? You were going to come to California or it didn't work out? I can't remember when that's, but hopefully you'll be back at some point.
Yeah, no, I'd love that. I mean, like I lived there for, 16 years. Got lots of fun memories of being on the beach there.
Yeah, Venice Beach is lovely.
Yeah, well, really, thank you so much. It's been a real joy, and
my pleasure.
Thank you.
Yeah. So we will include your contact information for our group, but is there anything that you'd like them to know about that you're offering currently?
Well, I just published my second novel, which is called Painless. And I have a Facebook group with, like a lot of this information in, and I am working, I do offer like a one-on-one course, but I'm actually working on recording it now because I can, the science stuff, like I said at the beginning, is I found it fascinating, but I think I need to record it because it's going to go in one ear and out the other because I'm not a scientist. So I'm going to start recording that and offering that as a program. So yeah, that's something I'm working on right now.
Brilliant. Yeah.
Well, I know your work has helped many in our group, and just the level of your understanding and being able to convey something that it can get really sticky in the area of health, in the area of pain, in the area of trauma. And so your clarity and ability to really convey in a compassionate way what the kindness is of seeing that something is 100% thought created, not the dismissal, like you were saying, of the story or lack of compassion for the pain and the suffering, because that is real. Those are the experiences, but the freedom that is available when we recognize that there is that leverage when we see it that way. And that doesn't mean necessarily, like you're saying, that the pain will disappear completely, but the relationship with it can be different. And in many cases, it does go away when it is just, not organic or physiological.
Yeah. You're evidently a very gifted teacher and so relatable. Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom.